there's two troubling prospects here. Troubling prospect one is that there are powerful, well-connected people who have a plan. Troubling prospect two is there's no plan at all.
I'm very excited about today's guest. He's one of the most brilliant men out there, one of the most courageous men out there when it comes to fighting against the mainstream narrative, the mainstream establishment and their narrative. Chris Martenson is our guest for the day, as I told you on Wednesday. And Chris Martenson is a very, very interesting man, a man who I've come to know over the last year or so, maybe 2 years actually. But I want whoever's out there, and even from your audience maybe, and I'm sure your audience will be able to tune into this as well, to become familiar with you or refamiliarize themselves with your sort of backstory.
So my origin story, let's see, professionally speaking, it took me a while to find my groove in life. And it was not till my senior year of college where I suddenly figured out that, hey, I like science. And so I really went hard down that path. I got to that point though, because I'd been an environmental educator. I taught rock climbing. I knew I liked teaching, but I thought, well, I want to teach it at the college level, so you need an advanced degree, but I had this really checkered sort of background. It took me a while to find where I was going. And so when I did, it all clicked all of a sudden. And when it did click, it clicked hard. And I was like, all of a sudden, I got 396 on my last year in all those science courses. I scored really well on my GREs because I know how to test well for whatever, skill that's worth. I can fill in the number twos, ovals, with pencils, right? So
Right.
So it all went down well. And then I'm in doing my degree, and I really love science. I really liked it because within about 5 months of study, I was at the edge of what we knew in the biological field. So I go to Duke University. I'm in the Department of Pathology. Toxicology is my subspecialty. Subspecialties, neurotoxicology. That's where all my research was. But basically, I'm working with live cells and trying to figure out why they break. So doing disease models for ALS, multiple sclerosis, things like that. So that was a lot of fun. And then I got into my postdoc work, and that's where I'm starting to feel into it. Like, oh, where am I going to go? And all my colleagues of my age who are going through these programs, this was the bad time of science. This is late 90s. There were 400 applicants for every job. And I'd just been through 7 years of additional, graduate schooling and postdoc experience, looking at maybe starting at $33,000 a year somewhere as a professor. And by the way, tenure is going away. They're starting to do the whole adjunct professor, no tenure kind of things. It's like, what is this about? So I took a little break from that. I went to Cornell, got an MBA. They have a 1-year program for people with advanced degrees. You just show on a test, understand statistics and math and stuff. So they spot you those. And then, so it just took a 1-year program. And then from there, I went into corporate finance at Pfizer for 3 years. Was not a good fit for me. No large corporation is. I don't, just not my thing. I hate politics. And anyway, wasn't my thing, but I did learn a lot there about how not to do business. And I learned all about like how not to be a boss, because I had a couple of not good ones. So it was not really a positive experience for me. And I came out of that into a consultancy, and I was a consultant, fly out Monday, come back Thursday kind of guy for a while, helping large corporations make the same mistakes they made last year. Again, not super fulfilling. And it was right around then that I suddenly started to investigate something. So this is right around when I left Pfizer was 2001. And we just come through the 2000 crash. I was a genius like everybody. Stocks go up, right? Then they go down. And I was trying to understand why that things were not feeling quite right. So I'm a curious guy. And I came across this book by G. Edward Griffin called Creature from Jekyll Island. Can't even remember how I got it, but in there he explains how the system of money works. Now, in the MBA program, they teach you how to compete for the almighty dollar. This book shows you how the arena is constructed, right? And I was like, it can't be true that all money's loaned into existence. So I checked it out, and it's all true, right? And so that book got me on this path of curiosity. So while I'm being a consultant, I'm all early internet. I'm just digging around, going, what is this story about? And eventually, by 2005, I had to quit that other job. And by 2006, I started my first blog. It was called Dr. Martinson's Straight Story. I was just trying to warn people about this housing bubble I saw. Now, 2006, 7 was real early to be telling people about that. 2008, everybody knew it was coming.
Right.
So first thing I did was I got real curious, and I'm a researcher, and I'm just won't let go till I understand something. And so I said, how does this system of money work? And I found something out. It's really weird, but once you understand the system of money, you understand that, listen, all money systems enforce some behaviors, punish others. Ours is debt-based money. Really good for creating urgency in people who like will do anything to make sure they can satisfy their debts. It's honestly it's a form of modern slavery, one step removed, right? Except the slaves own themselves, right? So it's a fun system. But when you understand debt-based money, it has a feature, and I couldn't resolve this feature. It bothered me. When you loan money into existence, it has a principal component, and then it's got the interest. Anytime something is growing by some rate of interest over time, it's growing exponentially, right? It's just a nature, it's a math feature, right? So 1% a year, still exponential. That's human population growth. 10% a minute, exponential. Bacteria doubling in a jar, exponential. So I looked at this. I'm like, okay. So our money system is growing exponentially, and there was a second feature is there's always more debt in the system than money. So if you ever tried to pay all the debt off, the money literally doesn't exist, right? It's just again, it's math. And I'm looking at this going, something's bothering me with this story because like if you have like right now, current numbers, the US has about $92 trillion of just debt in the system, but maybe about $20 trillion of actual money in the system. But the people who owe the money and the people who have the money, not the same people, right? So it's like, how can you have close to 100 trillion of debt and 1/5 of that in money? And so it just wasn't making sense.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, so I start examining like how does the economy grow? And then I wander over into this big world of resources, in particular oil, energy, natural gas, right? The economy, I realized, is just it's a fiction. It's a great fiction, but it's a fiction that relies on having these resources. And I'm starting to put these together. I said, oh, okay, so as long we can have an exponential infinite money system, as long as we have infinite amounts of resources, right? We don't. So I couldn't square the circle, and it got to so much in my head that I quit my job. I'm 42 years old. I have 3 young kids. I start a blog, so never take career advice from me, right? But I had to do this. It was just driving me nuts. And so one thing led to another, and I started giving these horrible, horrible lectures in church basements. I am not kidding. Full out 8 hours, some dude with a bunch of slides, and they weren't quite assembled yet into a coherent story. And
Yeah.
over time, it actually evolved. Like over about 6, 7 months, it became a pretty crisp lecture. And I started giving it to larger and larger audiences. And one day, a guy in the audience came up to me and he said, "This really needs to be online. More people need to hear this." And I didn't know how to do that. And this is like 2007, 8-ish. And so it's kind of a different world. Technology wasn't quite where it is today.
What it is today, right?
Yeah, so that I just sat down and started figuring out like the first version of something that became what's called the crash course was just some chapters I started putting out. First chapter is just like, hey, here's how what I'm going to tell you and why. Second chapter is here's money. Here, third chapter is exponential growth. Fourth chapter. So I just started laying these chapters out, and I was just putting them up on my website. And eventually, I had people banging on my door, literally, metaphorically. Some guy flew in from Singapore, handed me a check, and said, "Will this make you put these out faster?" He wanted to get to the end of the story. So this is all through from May, June, July, August of 2008, September, and then finally October. I finished the 20th chapter of the Crash Course online video series, and then of course the markets all fell apart, and that was the prime conclusion. So in life, I'd rather be lucky than good, but in this case, I think I had the story right, and I had the timing flawless. And so what happened next really surprised me. The crash course is some dude speaking in a disembodied way over a bunch of slides, and it's about 3 hours long, 20
Hmm.
chapters. And next thing I knew, this got translated into 12 separate languages by volunteers. It takes ungodly amount of time to translate that much stuff in Spanish, Hebrew. They did it completely right down to they changed every slide and changed it into their native language. And it really caught on because what happened, Royce, was I was telling the truth as much as I knew it, and at least it made sense, right? The whole Wall Street machinery is saying there is no bubble, no housing bubble. I'm saying there is one. Here's what a bubble looks like. Here's how you can detect it. And that's a bubble, right? And more importantly, I was saying this whole story It doesn't make sense. Like, you have some stuff you got to think through about the future, because what you think, if the recent past is your guide, that's going to be awful, because we're about to take a real sharp corner in this whole human story, because we can't keep doing things the way we've been doing them, which is just grow, 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 grow. There's people who know economics way better than me, and there's people who know energy way better than me, and people who know about environmental and ecological issues way better than me. But I sort of skim across all those with just enough detail to put it together in a picture that says, you better think about this. Big change is coming. Can we talk Kissinger for just a second?
Let, Go ahead, talk Kissinger first. Let's start there because I want to go along the line. So let's go Kissinger,
All right.
Nixon first.
All right, because 71 was sort of that seminal, slam the gold window moment kind of a thing. People focus on that. Something more important was happening behind the scenes, which is, if you're off the gold standard, what standard are you on? Most people don't know this, but 1973, Kissinger, evil genius. By the way, I got to give this guy mad props for what he did. He said, wow, this is untenable. What do we do? So he was the guy who got the Saudis to agree that they were only going to price their oil product in dollars.
The
And
petrodollar.
when yeah, exactly, that began in 1973. And the deal was, now U.S. Treasuries have real value because the Saudis sell their oil. When the Saudis sell oil in dollars, what does that mean? It means there's a server or computer in New York City that records an oil sale, and the Saudis get $100 million. And then that money literally goes straight over to another server in New York City and says, entry, you own $100 million of U.S. Treasuries or whatever. And so the Saudis were taking all that oil money and they were putting it into U.S. stocks and bonds and real estate, right? So this is fab, because we are exporting treasuries. Now you can deficit spend to your heart's content. Fight a war and lower taxes. We don't care, because all this money's pouring back in. That's the petrodollar, right? And so that was genius, because that replaced backing the dollar with gold to backing it with somebody else's oil. I'm telling you, it was a genius move. It really was. Evil genius. And then, really, honestly, where things really went off the rail from the Federal Reserve standpoint as an organization was this guy called Alan Greenspan. He comes in like 1985 or 6, I forget when. And then we have this panic on 1987, Black Monday. Dow drops 25%. And he just opened up the checkbook and created what was then known as the Fed put. Up to that point in time, like, things come, things go. This was the first time the Fed said, oh, we have a role in moderating what happens in the stock market. So Wall
Mm.
Street looks around and goes, oh, you do? We
Mm.
can work with this, right? And so now this is where the heads we win, tails you lose thing comes in. So we
Don't fight the Fed.
don't fight the Fed. So by 1994, we have this other piece, which is a little bit of a hiccup in the corporate bond market. Alan Greenspan implements this little known rule called the sweeps program, which allowed banks to take a bank account you own and that's still in play today, or a bank account I have. It's a demand account. That's checking savings. You can demand that money, walk in, get it. But banks are allowed, because of Alan Greenspan, what he did in 95, to take that money, sweep it at 11:59 at night into a timed account, which is a CD. Then they take their snapshot at midnight and say, hey, how much do we have to have in reserve? And there's a zero in your account. So they don't have to hold anything in reserve. And then they sweep it back out at 12:01, comes back into your demand account.
Whoa, whoa, whoa!
That's the
Stop,
system.
stop, stop! Wait, stop, stop.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Now we're
yeah,
down
yeah,
to the
yeah. I
sausage,
mean,
buddy.
you know.
Up to 1994, if you had that $100, we had a system called fractional reserve banking. And the fractional reserve ratio was 10%, meaning that if you had $100 in your bank account and I have $100, the bank only has to, by law, hold $10 of that in reserve.
Right.
Okay? That's it. Now, let's carry forward 1 year, 1995. Now we have the sweep program in place. You have $100 in the bank. I have $100 in the bank. The bank has to hold $20 in reserve, except now it doesn't have to hold any, because it sweeps it out of the account at midnight, takes a snapshot, sweeps it back in. And so we went from a fractional reserve system in 94 to a zero reserve system in 95. So when people say, oh, the internet bubble, remember that, all that stock stuff? I was a
Yeah.
genius. I was investing. I was making all this money. You're always a genius when the Fed is just throwing money in. But that was the first time there were zero reserves. So banks were just lending like crazy, and, pets.com and all kinds of dumb stuff. Well, that blew up in 1998, long-term capital management. Smartest guys in the room. You got Merriweather and Scholes and all these, like, the super geniuses of the world, and they blew up a otherwise run-of-the-mill hedge fund. but they were, betting badly and wrongly on bonds, and something happened that shouldn't have happened, but did. And then Alan Greenspan again wrote in and they patched something together and they bailed them out. And then now Wall Street's going, okay, we got infinite money and no risk. Because if you're going to screw up, you got to screw up big, like really big. If you're small, if I lose money in the stock market, we're so sorry, enjoy living under a bridge. But if they do, they saw how they got bailed out. So the rule was just simple moral hazard. If you're
Moral
going to
hazard.
screw up big. So Wall Street, they're humans and they're smart and they got to it real quick. And so then 2000 happens after 1998. And that was a gigantic blow up. And they got bailed out enormously again, hugely. So then what happens? Well, Greenspan gets passed off. We get this guy named Bernanke. He comes in, he gives us 1% blowout rates forever, and then we get this housing bubble. It's extraordinary. That blows up. And that's an even bigger blow up than 2000, which was a bigger blow up than 98, which was a bigger blow up than what 94 would have been if they had just stopped doing that, right? And so my model for this, if we're tracking the Federal Reserve, is little hiccup in 87. So they start steering, on the car, and now we're kind of skewing to this other ditch. 94, big overcorrection. Now we're starting to really slew around. 98, we're skidding back. 2000, 2007, and then they just sort of kept that percolating along, and then COVID happens. And if you had told me 15 years ago that I'd be sitting there watching the Fed dump trillions of dollars into the market in a matter of months, I would have said, you're nuts. I wouldn't have believed you. Nobody would stand for that. It's going to cause massive inflation, but you can feel it. We're in that final hewing and slewing of this vehicle. It's about to just go 360 off a cliff, right? And everybody can feel it. But
Okay,
it's
okay. Wait a
mistake,
second now.
mistake, 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 mistake.
So
China went from importing barely 2 million barrels a day to now 15 million barrels a day. And if they continue on that track by 2030, Royce, China is importing 100% of all known exportable oil in the world. So it ain't going to happen. And the only question we have to resolve is, well, if that's not going to happen, how is it that China does not suck up every available exportable barrel? Is it price or is it war? Right? Those two things. Now you have US generals openly saying their bogey is 2025 for when we tangle up with China. And we have to be clear about what we're tangling up about. All prosperity comes from energy. If you have the energy you need, you can have a prosperous nation. You can't build a complex economy and a complex system and a complex society and run a complex military without lots of energy. So right now, we don't have any other energy. There's nothing else I know about. Listen, if somebody says, some guy developed something in his garage and we can burn water or whatever, I'll be the first to change my tune, but I track this stuff daily. I mean, I'm just all over it. Like, where are we on this story? And it's astonishing to me. China's all over this story. They get it. Russia gets this story. Europe's just about to figure this out good and hard, right? And in this country, balloons and transgender, we're just like dilly-dallying around these like completely irrelevant, like things that aren't even on my top 100 list of concerns are
yeah,
somehow number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 for my culture. And I'm telling you, it's like non-serious. It's if these people aren't just ignorant and or clueless, then I have to confront the idea that they maybe are purposely trying to destroy the country. But whether they're doing it maliciously or ignorantly, the trajectory is the same. We are in no position for the future right now based on China, because I talk with people from China. They get it. That whole Belt and Road Initiative, that's
yep.
China
One belt,
saying,
one belt, one road.
yeah, they looked at the situation. They said, wow, surface to air missiles are really badass right now. We can't depend on trying to get stuff across the ocean anymore, because a ship is basically a block of steel that doesn't have a hole in it yet, looking for a reason to sink. So if you want to have access to this stuff, now China's built themselves a rail system and a road system to be able to walk to all the best resources left in the world, because they get it. This whole next period of time is about your access to energy and access to resources. And in this last year, I've seen hair on fire kind of stuff, Royce, about what's going on, where the Saudis aren't taking Biden's calls and they're holding summits with Xi and Putin and they're
Yeah,
inking
yeah.
deals and they're selling stuff. And they did their first everybody needs to know, your listeners need to know this. They did their first cross-border bilateral non-dollar based trade in yuan. So they are
Right.
now trading directly with each other. And it takes time to get those banking systems worked out, but that's happening like It's all going on, and it's really big deal. It's a really big deal. This is something that's been in play since 73, and in the next 5 to 10 years, it's going out the window or faster if we get into some kinetic sort of nightmare. I've lost any hope that we're gonna like sort of straighten up and fly right in time. Every passing year is just like, oh my God, I can't even believe that what's dominating the airwaves right now. It just feels like that final cacophonous moment, before the end, the curtain comes down. But if we could, what would we do? Well, instantly we would say that 4,500 square foot house you talked about someone living in, you don't need that much, right? So not to dictate it, but you put market forces on that where somebody says, okay, I'm going to build something with R40 insulation in the walls and ceilings. We knew how to do this in the 70s, Royce, where you could build a house, face it south, put the windows on the south side, not so many on the north side, insulate it properly, and it needs a fraction of the energy to run.
Mm.
When you fly in to Tel Aviv or Beijing or any other place that's figured this out, you see solar hot water collectors on all the roofs. It's illegal not to put them up there. Why? Because the sun heats stuff up great. Turning it into electricity, a little trickier. But otherwise, to have the sun heat your water, 25% of the energy in any home is to heat the water in that home. So they just decided in all these other countries, well, let's put it on the roof and make the sun do that for free. These things have an art. Like, if let's just take this one example, like this is changing the narrative. Like, if you're not going to be dummies about it, you say, wow, wherever it's appropriate, we're going to put solar hot water on the roof. It involves a collection tank and some pipes and a little tiny 100-watt circulating pump, not fancy. So when you fly into Phoenix next time, look down out of the window and see, in a sunny place where this makes all the sense in the world, how many of these solar hot water collectors you see, and it's pretty much zero. Now, if we did that, oh, we just bought a bunch of time, right? Because we're not squandering our energy anymore. It's like, why would we not do this? And by the way, if we install these domestic jobs, these are easy to install and maintain domestically. We are sending less money overseas to the extent we have to use electricity where we're having to import something to make that electricity, on and on. Like everything you could care about, from national security to economic well-being, these things have crazy paybacks, right? Like 5, 6 years. And then it's just free money for the next 25 years of that system life, right? So why aren't we doing that? I submit to you, it's because we have the wrong story in our head. The story is we don't have to do that. Or it would be embarrassing if we had to do that, but it's just smart, right? The Israelis are smart, the Chinese are smart, South Americans are smart about this. It's just not being dummies about it. So that would be an example, but we would have to begin thinking about things for the long term. So 100 billion went to Ukraine. What if we just took 10 billion and gave it to what's called permaculture, which is permanent agriculture? You give it to these bright young kids who are trying to figure out how to sustainably make our soils become soils again. Industrial agriculture creates dirt, lifeless outdoor hydroponics, because we have to dump fertilizers on this dead soil and then stuff grows.
Yeah.
What if we were putting back into that sort of effort? What if, you said, oh yeah, we'll get back to the land, but I got to tell you, if it went lights out, grid down right now, my estimate is 80, 90% of the people don't make that trip if the lights stay off for a year, right? Because they don't have the skills, because they don't know how to do it,
Of
because,
course.
it's been
Of
too
course.
long, all of that, right?
Of course.
So
Yeah.
these are the things that, if I could wave my magic policy wand, we should be thinking about what is the plan, and how are we incentivizing people, and how are we creating the infrastructure of the future that you could actually map. Remember the demoralization? Cognitive map and your reality aren't mapping each other, right?
Right.
Once you understand where we're headed in the story, you say, wow, it's totally unsustainable, and nobody in authority seems to even notice, right?